The 1960s in Hollywood was an era of profound transformation, a golden twilight where the grand glamour of cinema legends began to blend with the intimate magic of the television screen. Families gathered around glowing boxes, seeking a sanctuary of pure comfort, an escape into an idealized world where every suburban problem could be neatly resolved within 30 minutes. It was against this backdrop of perfection that a cultural phenomenon was born, a show that seemed to be nothing more than a light-hearted fantasy. To the millions who tuned in, it offered the ultimate reassurance, a world where a simple twitch of a nose could set the universe right, where chaos could be instantly smoothed over, and where love always triumphed before the closing credits rolled. But Hollywood has always been a master of illusion, a place where the brightest spotlights cast the deepest shadows. Beneath the infectious laughter, the bright living rooms, and the sparkling special effects, there was a secret weight. This was not just a story about whimsical spells and comedic misunderstandings. It was a deeply human narrative about a woman hiding her true essence to keep the peace, a delicate marriage balancing immense love against the rigid constraints of societal control, and an extraordinary cast of characters whose real lives carried triumphs, losses, and heartbreaks long after the studio lights went dark. At the absolute center of this dazzling universe stood a woman of unparalleled warmth and intelligence, Elizabeth Montgomery. Stepping into the shoes of the iconic Samantha Stevens in 1964 at the age of 31, she brought a profound tenderness to a role that could have easily been a caricature. She portrayed a powerful being who continuously chose patience and restraint over raw dominance, proving that true power means nothing if it turns your heart cold. Yet, the face of this comforting television magic belonged to an actress whose own story would ultimately be marked by a bittersweet finality, a life of fearless artistry that ended far too soon. And then there was her partner in this domestic dance, the original mortal husband, Dick York. As Darren Stevens, he was the very definition of a man trying desperately to keep his ordinary world intact while anchored to the extraordinary. His manic energy and desperate attempts to maintain normalcy masked a beautiful human chemistry that made the fantasy believable. But behind that frantic comedic timing lay a heavy unseen price. While his character fought to keep chaos from breaking through the front door, the actor himself was engaged in a silent, grueling battle with his own body. A physical struggle that would eventually shatter the illusion and alter the course of the show forever. As we begin to rewind the tapes of that famous living room, we find a tapestry woven with unforgettable figures. The sharp-tongued, aristocratic mother who feared her daughter was trading immortality for a fragile mortal life. The nosy neighbor whose frantic paranoia masked a tragic truth no one would believe. And an ensemble of legendary performers who gave their souls to this cozy magic. The spell they cast felt real because it was powered by genuine human experience. But as the years have passed, the echoes of their real-life dramas sound louder than the laughter. What really happened behind the perfect facade of television's most enchanting family? The answers lie just behind the curtain, waiting to be revealed. To understand the magnitude of what unfolded on the Hollywood soundstages during the golden years of this beloved sitcom, one must look beneath the shimmering surface of its instant success. When the series made its triumphant debut in the autumn of 1964, it completely reshaped American popular culture overnight, offering a comforting sanctuary to millions of families. The world was instantly enchanted by the story of a beautiful modern witch who willingly chose the quiet routines of suburban domesticity over the boundless allure of supreme magical power. Yet, behind the cameras, the reality of creating this weekly illusion was an exhausting, high-stakes endeavor that demanded absolute perfection. Elizabeth Montgomery was not just a talented actress stepping into a career-defining role. She was Hollywood royalty, the daughter of the revered cinematic titan, Robert Montgomery. She possessed an impeccable artistic pedigree and a fierce desire to establish her own creative identity far away from her father's formidable shadow. Collaborating closely with her husband, the brilliant director and producer William Asher, Montgomery poured her heart and soul into shaping a character who was sharp, independent, and deceptively complex. The early seasons were characterized by a relentless production schedule that required shooting over 30 episodes a year, thrusting the tightly knit cast into the intense glare of international stardom. But even as the network celebrated the massive ratings, the pristine facade of the Stevens living room began to experience its very first microscopic fractures, entirely hidden away from the adoring public as the show solidified its legendary status. The intricate dynamics behind the velvet curtains of the set evolved into a captivating study of professional devotion and hidden emotional currents. No individual embodied this magnificent complexity more than the incomparable Agnes Moorehead. Born at the dawn of the century, Moorehead was already recognized as a formidable titan of the American theatre and a foundational member of Orson Welles' legendary Mercury Theatre. Having delivered breathtaking performances in masterpieces like Citizen Kane. For an actress of her immense dramatic stature, transitioning to a weekly television situation comedy was initially viewed by many of her contemporary peers as a surprising step down. However, Moorehead approached the eccentric character of Endora not as a simplistic antagonist, but as a grand, almost Shakespearean figure operating within a technicolor world. Draped in lavish, flowing garments and sporting dramatic makeup, she commanded every single frame she occupied with an unparalleled blend of sarcasm and aristocratic pride. Yet, away from the laughter and the sparkling special effects, a distinct layer of professional tension permeated the air. Moorehead was an absolute perfectionist who demanded uncompromising excellence and rigorous discipline from her fellow actors, creating an atmosphere where the dramatic stakes always felt incredibly high. She refused to ever play Endora merely for a cheap laugh. Instead, she infused the character with a poignant maternal fear, a genuine dread that her daughter was foolishly trading an immortal, powerful existence for a fragile mortal life destined to break her heart, while the powerhouse women of the series provided the glamour and the intellectual weight. The vital human anchor of this domestic fantasy rested entirely upon the fragile shoulders of Dick York. His portrayal of the beleaguered mortal husband, Darren Stevens, was nothing short of a comedic tour de force defined by a spectacular display of physical comedy, breathless double takes, and a beautifully vulnerable panic. The palpable, authentic chemistry he shared with Montgomery was the essential ingredient that transformed a fantastical premise into something deeply relatable. However, as the show marched forward through its golden era, a dark, agonizing reality began to relentlessly close in on York behind the scenes. Years prior to joining the series, while filming the 1959 movie They Came to Cordura, he had suffered a catastrophic back injury during a tragic accident on location. The muscles in his spine had been permanently torn, leaving him trapped in a perpetual state of severe, unyielding physical torment. When he originally accepted the role of Darren, he desperately hoped that the physical demands of a television sitcom would be manageable, but the brutal weekly production cycle quickly shattered that hope. To endure the long, exhausting hours standing under the hot studio lights, York became increasingly dependent on powerful medications, keeping the true extent of his immense suffering a closely guarded secret from the public. The contrast between the on-screen illusion and the off-screen reality was heartbreaking. While Darren was frantically running across the screen to fix magical mishaps, the actor embodying him was privately disintegrating, relying on pure willpower and specially constructed props just to remain upright until the director yelled cut. But perhaps the most profound, deeply moving secret of those early, triumphant years belonged to the woman who established the very template for television's most iconic neighbor. Alice Pearce was a comedic revelation as the original Gladys Kravitz, possessing a frantic, hyper-alert physical energy that served as the perfect comedic foil to the calm elegance of the Stevens household. Her performance was brilliant, precisely because she committed to it with a fearless lack of vanity, perfectly capturing the escalating obsession of a woman who was entirely right about the supernatural occurrences next door, yet completely dismissed by a world that treated her as hysterical. What the millions of laughing viewers worldwide never once suspected, and what many of her closest colleagues were deliberately kept from knowing, was that Pearce was engaged in a literal battle for her life from the very moment she joined the cast in 1964. Prior to filming the very first episodes of the series, she had received a devastating diagnosis of terminal ovarian cancer. Fully aware that her remaining time on Earth was tragically brief, Pearce made a courageous choice to keep her terminal illness an absolute secret from the network and the public. She refused to allow her impending fate to dim her creative spirit or alter the immense joy she brought to the performance. Instead, she poured every ounce of her remaining vitality into Gladys Kravitz, transforming a potentially repetitive character into an immortal masterpiece of American comedy. This hidden struggle cast a poignant shadow over the show's early success, serving as a heartbreaking testament to an era where the magic on the screen was sustained by an unimaginable level of personal sacrifice and a quiet determination to keep the world laughing, even as the curtain was slowly beginning to fall. The delicate illusion of perpetual youth, sparkling glamour, and effortless domestic joy could only be sustained for so long before the harsh, unyielding intrusions of reality breached the heavy studio gates of Hollywood. In March of 1966, the first devastating blow struck the tightly knit production, sending a silent shockwave through the sound stages when Alice Pearce succumbed to her quiet, agonizing battle with illness at the age of 48. To a public accustomed to her boundless, frantic physical energy and impeccable comedic timing as the unforgettable Gladys Kravitz, her sudden disappearance from the television screen was a jarring, confusing shock. Yet, the vast corporate machinery of television in the mid-1960s was a relentless force that prioritized continuity and commercial stability above all else. In an era when serious terminal illnesses were spoken of only in hushed, frightened whispers and completely erased from network press releases, the studio executives pivoted with calculated precision to protect their highly lucrative asset. The role was seamlessly passed to Sandra Gould, who took over the character with an exaggerated panic and a brilliant, sharp physical energy that kept the narrative moving forward without a hitch. While Gould successfully preserved the essential comedic vitality of the neighborhood's resident cynic, an undeniable and deeply bittersweet shift had occurred behind closed doors. The cast was forced to mourn their brilliant, courageous colleague in strict privacy, burying their profound grief beneath wide, sparkling smiles the moment the cameras began to roll. The global audience was invited to continue laughing at the antics on screen, never fully grasping that this seamless transition was an illusion engineered to conceal a tragic reality, proving that the dazzling facade of the network must never be allowed to crack. But the true catalyst for the show's most dramatic, earth-shattering turning point was a slow-motion human tragedy unfolding directly in front of the cameras, culminating in an unprecedented crisis that no amount of clever editing or supportive set pieces could hide. By 1969, the physical condition of Dick York had reached a terrifying breaking point that threatened to completely dismantle the entire series. The agonizing spine injury that had tormented him for a decade had escalated into a non-stop, paralyzing nightmare, and his desperate reliance on heavy prescription medications to survive the long shooting days was rapidly destroying his health and mental stamina. He was performing on pure adrenaline and an extraordinary sense of professional duty, but the human body possesses absolute limits that even the most heroic willpower cannot overcome. The definitive, terrifying climax occurred during the production of the 5th season, when York suffered a complete physical collapse on the set, his body finally surrendering to the years of unyielding torture. He was rushed to the hospital in a state of critical exhaustion, forcing a sudden and absolute halt to production. Behind closed doors, a frantic panic gripped the network executives and the show's creators. The central dynamic of the entire series, the vital, fragile, mortal anchor that made the supernatural premise believable and grounded the romance, had vanished overnight. It was a moment of profound vulnerability for a global phenomenon, exposing the fragile reality that the entire multi-million-dollar enterprise rested upon the broken back of a single suffering man. The corporate response to this profound human crisis was swift, unsentimental, and clinical, perfectly illustrating the cold reality of the entertainment industry during its golden age. Rather than allowing the series to naturally fade away or publicly acknowledging the heartbreaking, tragic circumstances surrounding York's departure, the network made the audacious, high-stakes decision to simply replace their leading man and hope the audience wouldn't look too closely. Dick Sargent was brought into the fold to assume the mantle of Darren Stevens, an assignment that carried an unimaginable, almost cruel level of professional pressure. Sargent was tasked with honoring a character that millions of households had intimately welcomed into their lives for 5 years, all while avoiding a direct, cheap imitation of York's highly specific, iconic, frantic style. He chose to deliver a performance that was notably different, softer, more relaxed, and infused with a quiet skill of continuity that focused on the steady heartbeat of the marriage. This unprecedented casting swap was a massive gamble that risked breaking the spell for a fiercely loyal fanbase. Yet, the media and the public of the era largely cooperated with the studio's carefully curated narrative, framing the transition as a routine piece of business rather than the tragic consequence of an actor's physical destruction. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth Montgomery had to summon all of her professional grace to build a brand new on-screen chemistry, maintaining the illusion of a perfect marriage while privately carrying the heavy emotional weight of the empty space left by her original partner. This pattern of sudden, heartbreaking losses cloaked in a veneer of flawless professional perfection became an unsettling, recurring theme that defined the later years of the production. Just a short time before York's collapse, the set had already been deeply touched by profound sorrow. When Marion Lorne, the beloved actress who portrayed the delightfully eccentric and vulnerable Aunt Clara, passed away at the age of 84. Her performance had brought an irreplaceable element of genuine sweetness and aging vulnerability to the show, earning her a posthumous Emmy Award that served as a bittersweet reminder of her immense talent. When she passed, the writers chose to simply write her character out of existence, leaving a quiet, echoing void in the living room that could never truly be filled by any new addition. These successive losses of foundational cast members transformed the once vibrant, magical soundstage into a beautiful house, haunted by sudden absences and unspoken grief. Yet, the pristine, colorized world of the sitcom remained entirely unbothered on the television screens of America. The studio maintained a rigid, unyielding silence regarding the true cost of their success, ensuring that the domestic fantasy never lost its bright, comforting sheen. This strict adherence to the illusion created a surreal, profound contrast between the joyful, light-hearted escapism broadcast into millions of homes and the deep, private mourning shared by the surviving cast members who continued to show up, smile on cue, and deliver their lines, keeping the magic alive while the world they had built was quietly fracturing behind the scenes. When the final curtains fell on the production in the spring of 1972, the magnificent illusion dissolved into the annals of television history, permanently shaping popular culture. The actors, who had spent nearly a decade inhabiting the brightly lit living room of Westport, were suddenly cast back into a rapidly changing Hollywood, forced to navigate the challenge of typecasting. Elizabeth Montgomery, fiercely determined to distance herself from the immaculate image of Samantha Stevens, embarked on a daring second act. She actively sought out dark, complex roles that stunned audiences accustomed to her gentle nose twitch. Her performance in the 1975 television film The Legend of Lizzie Borden was a definitive masterclass in psychological tension, proving that her dramatic range was utterly boundless. Throughout the subsequent decades, she became a pioneering force in dramatic television movies, tackling intense, real-world narratives with a fearless artistry. Off the screen, she poured her immense celebrity into philanthropic and social causes, remaining a private, dignified figure. When she was diagnosed with colon cancer, she faced the crisis with the same quiet resilience that had defined her life, passing away on May 18, 1995, at 62. Looking back from the vantage point of 2026, her legacy feels incredibly poignant. She remains the golden standard of a leading lady whose real-life presence offered a genuine sense of safety to millions of viewers. The contrasting fates of the two extraordinary men who shared the role of her mortal husband provide some of the most moving chapters in television history. Dick York's life after his sudden, agonizing departure from the series was a grueling test of human endurance. Confined to his home by the catastrophic spine injury that had cut his career short, he fell into severe financial hardship and waged a painful battle against addiction to the prescription painkillers that had once kept him functional on set. Yet, in his final years, he achieved a profound redemption. Operating entirely from his small house, using nothing but a telephone, he founded a charitable organization called Acting for Life. Dedicating his remaining energy to securing food and clothing for the homeless, turning his own immense physical suffering into a lifeline for others before his passing on February 20th, 1992, at 63. His successor, Dick Sargent, carved out a completely different but equally monumental legacy of courage. After continuing a steady career across television and film, Sargent made history in 1991 by choosing to publicly come out as a gay man. In an era when the industry still demanded absolute secrecy regarding personal identity, his public declaration was an act of profound bravery that extended far beyond sitcom fame, offering vital hope to countless individuals before his death on July 8, 1994 at 64. In 2026, both performers are remembered for the immense humanity they displayed when the cameras stopped rolling. The incredible ensemble of supporting players who populated this magical universe left behind individual marks that defined the very archetypes of American television. Agnes Moorehead, who passed away on April 30th, 1974, at 73, left a magnificent void that could never truly be filled. Her portrayal of Endora became the definitive blueprint for the theatrical, overbearing, yet fiercely protective maternal figure, a masterclass in performance that contemporary creators still study. David White, who brought a perfect balance of charm and corporate hypocrisy to the advertising executive Larry Tate, remained a highly respected presence across the television landscape, ensuring his scenes always carried a sharp, professional rhythm until his death on November 27, 1990, at 74. Alongside him, Casey Rogers provided the essential gentle warmth as his on-screen wife, Louise, remaining a beloved figure until her passing in 2006 at 80. The suburban neighborhood dynamic was completed by George Tobias as the long-suffering, skeptical Abner Kravitz, who passed away in 1980 at 78, and Sandra Gould, who carried the frantic mantle of Gladys Kravitz with immense physical energy until her death in 1999 at 82. Each of these seasoned professionals brought a lived-in authenticity to their roles, ensuring that the everyday world felt entirely real, beyond the immediate family. The enduring charm of the series was continuously revitalized by an extraordinary roster of eccentric guest stars who stole every scene they occupied. Paul Lynde, whose razor-sharp comedic timing and delightfully mischievous energy made Uncle Arthur an instant pop culture phenomenon, remained a towering presence in comedy until his untimely passing on January 10, 1982, at 55. Bernard Fox brought a wonderful, unbothered sophistication to the eccentric Dr. Bombay, building a long career as a classic character actor in major cinematic epics and family classics before passing away in 2016 at 89. Alice Ghostly infused the well-meaning, clumsy maid Esmeralda with a deep, endearing vulnerability that turned every magical mishap into a moment of genuine sweetness, continuing a prolific career across television and theatre until her death in 2007 at 84. At the center of the next generation was Erin Murphy, who grew up directly under the glare of the spotlight as the magical daughter Tabitha Stevens. Navigating the treacherous waters of childhood stardom with remarkable grace, Murphy transitioned away from full-time acting into successful entrepreneurial ventures, remaining an elegant custodian of the show's rich historical memory. In 2026, at 62, her presence serves as a beautiful, living bridge to that vanished era of classic television. When we step back and view this entire sweeping narrative from the modern perspective of 2026, the lasting spell of this television masterpiece becomes abundantly clear. It was never merely a light-hearted show about witchcraft or domestic misunderstandings. It was a profound, deeply resonant allegory about love under immense pressure, the preservation of personal identity in a world that demands absolute conformity, and the steep human cost of trying to fit into a society that wants to make you smaller. Almost all of the iconic faces who once populated that cozy, brightly lit living room have now slipped quietly into history, and watching the timeless reruns today carries a specific, poignant weight as the passage of time grows louder with every passing year. Yet, despite the underlying heartbreaks, The private struggles and the heavy prices paid by the cast behind the scenes, the art they created together remains entirely untouched by decay. The famous, comforting nose twitch of Samantha Stevens still lands with the exact same warmth and reassurance that it did over 6 decades ago, offering an enduring promise that no matter how chaotic, overwhelming, or frightening the real world becomes, there will always be a safe sanctuary where love prevails, secrets are gently protected, and everything can be made perfectly right again, if only for 22 minutes. News banner. Breaking down the illusion. The tragic real-life stories and hidden sacrifices of the Bewitched cast revealed.